Hey guys, this will be video 4 for the how to restore a vintage Gibson Les Paul. And picking up from video 3 from this series, I'll do a bit of a flyby and then we'll primarily talk about getting ready to glue your neck down. But in video 3, I still had this fretboard in the jig, getting ready to had not even been tapered yet. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But basically, I'll just do, as I said, a bit of a flyby to show the guitar coming together. And it's funny, there's a part of me, it's like I'm always really critical about everything, but it really is difficult to bridle yourself and not try to do too much work too soon. Have to do everything in stages. And I say this, it's really frustrating because it never looks very good until you get really close to finishing the guitar. So anyway, now that we don't have the bridge on there anymore, I don't have to talk about that. But let me get my pen that dropped. And for you guys that are looking for me to do work, I don't do a lot of work in my videos because of the liability primarily. But I did do some work in the video 3. So if you want to check that out, go watch me do some sanding and stuff. And I always talk about the operations. I think it's better to spend time talking about the theoretical aspects of it, or how to build a little jig to help you do your job that basically costs nothing, but is instrumental in helping you keep things under control. So with that said, what you just saw there, you've got the fretboard is pinned in place per my layout, and I actually did lay it out per the center line of the neck, the lower, and that worked out perfectly to truss that up there. But on this guitar, it's a little bit strange because this bridge has been relocated, because if you're not aware, this guitar came to me, it had a 25.5-inch scale oddball fretboard on it, and even a lower that the client wanted to be removed and taken back to original specs. But I discovered a whole lot of different little things that I realized I've got to define what it is that I'm going to do and can do. And I just saw that it was wise to just leave all of this electronics in place and this pick guard in place, and just build it back per what he sent me in this area right here. But then in midstream, he kind of asked me, how did I feel about doing a 1 3/4-inch nut? Because Drum's a really big guy. And I was like, no, man, I don't have a problem at all. Once I found out, I think he's like 6 feet 6 inches tall. And I think he's almost as big as his dad. I think he said his dad is a Big Jer and Aunt B. I'll call them out. I keep forgetting to mention them in the series, so I believe they were watching some of the videos. But anyway, I've heard Big Jer's a pretty big guy himself. So long story short, we're making a big guitar here, and in case I forget, I could even make it a little bit thicker here as well, a drum. But it's coming together really well, and it is ready to glue down. But I just wanted to go through some of these things and talk about my thought process as I'm getting to this point. Okay, so let me take these 2 pins out, because I literally just put them in. And let me do this because I don't want to risk breaking them. I'll just do this off camera. I may shake the camera stand a little bit, but I'll try to keep it on camera a little bit. Uh, 1/16 inch drill bit that obviously you used as an alignment. I can't do this leaning out. I'll break the thing. Initially, you use them to define the alignment location, but then you'll actually install them and use them as alignment pins when you're gluing or epoxying the fretboard down, and it'll just guarantee a good job. But if you do that, then the jig that you design has to accommodate those locations and whatnot. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video, so this actual video a little bit. So, that shows you, where your pin location typically hits right here. You don't want to go very deep, just enough to make certain that the pin beds into it. Doesn't matter. You could go a little bit deeper up here, but just be careful down here. You don't want to go more than maybe about 3/16 of an inch deep or something like that. Just enough to keep it from sliding in any direction. Okay. I think I've already done a little bit of a flyby as far as the install in the neck, but anyway, yeah, because I had talked about that pick guard location and how, I covered that in extensive detail at the beginning or middle of video 3, where I was talking about how it prompted me to start considering, what was it that I really wanted to do or not do and things like that. So let me put this over here. But and I don't think there's any need to talk about the guitar all that much, other than we'll just keep it, we'll push it over to the side. And in case I need to reference it, then we'll have it there. But for the most part, I want to talk about picking up from video 3 and what it took to get here. I so wanted to, turn on the camera and film some of the work, but I worked on this all day Saturday, a little bit on Sunday night. Today's Tuesday, I believe, or Wednesday. Worked on it both Monday and Tuesday. And it was just to this point where it's like, man, if I stop and try to clean up, set up the camera, it's just going to slow me down, or worse, I risk screwing something up. So let's talk about what it took to get it off of this jig, where I had it spot glued down on both ends, and then 2 little spots in the middle. And you might think, well, how are you getting that to fit back in there after you've already put this binding on here? This one up top, well, it was left in place, but the one here on the bottom, I did break loose, and I had to refasten it because I had to have something to hold it back on that jig once I started doing all the cleanup on the binding. Okay, so that's what I meant by if you got a nice little jig, then it's really going to be your hand holder or your second set of hands that helps keep you in check. And also you're able to just verify things. So what took place was after I got it off of after I got the radius work done. Obviously, it's still rectangular. There has been no taper work done. So I did all of the radius work, machine work, and I'm fairly certain I covered it at the very end of the video. As long as you epoxy these mother of pearl in place, even the really large rectangular ones for the custom, well, like what's right there in my hand, you can route the radius. So don't think that you can't machine that. You can machine it as long as you have them epoxied in. I wouldn't risk, I definitely wouldn't have a problem risking machining the pearloid that was glued in with like a, what is it I use? I always have to look at Stuart McDonald. It's called Bindall cement. This is the binding cement that I used to glue my binding on. So, and for Chip's Les Paul, I did glue his 2 mother of pearl, his pearloid binding in with the Bindall cement. And I got to tell you, it was far more rock hard than I was expecting. So it turned out extremely, extremely well. So the reason I started talking about that, I would not have a problem routing those either. Okay, with the machine bit, because I had consulted with Stuart McDonald on that, and they were like, no, what I would recommend is go ahead and machining your fretboard or having your fretboard machined, and then glue or epoxy your mother of pearl in, and then just work all of that by hand. But and I understand why he was being conservative, but that would be an enormous amount of hand work, and you run the risk of, the more you're up here with some sort of sanding jig by hand trying to shape all that pearl down, you run the risk of getting into the wood and you don't even know it. So it was all radiused off. When it was glued in and rectangular, every bit of that was radiused off. Then I came in with the sanding jig and 220 and did some of the initial cleanup work. Again, it's still rectangular. It's still originally glued to the jig. I'm not going to repeat that again, but cleaned it up with 220 on the radius, and then started verifying that everything was nice, and remaining nice and true, very clean and straight. Everything about that was remaining. As long as your initial surface was perfectly true, then any machine work, and that center line is perfectly consistent on the board, then any machine work that you did is going to follow. Okay? And it did. So we're in great shape there. And so it was up to 220, and then I did a little bit of hand polish work with the 400, where I was kind of working out some of the scars in the pearl, but never getting up into the wood at all. I was only wanting to sit here and watch the linear lines from the 220, which is pretty coarse. I wanted to work that out before I removed it and went to the tapering jig and got ready to do my tape work. So spent about 35 to 45 minutes doing all my pearl polish work, kind of like hand buffing, but only took it up to 400 because eventually, once this is glued down to the guitar, that's where I'll come back and even still do additional radius linear work with like a 400 grit, and then move up to 600, 800, and then eventually a 1215, and then I finish out completely with like a 3000 grit. So, but with this guitar, you don't want it to look like a absolutely brand new $30,000 jazz guitar. There at the last, when I'm doing the all the stain work, I'll make certain that it has some aging look to it, and but it'll still be nice and slick. We want a really phenomenal playing surface. That's the most important thing. Well, I'm not talking about relicking it, but I just want to make certain that it's not, you don't see your mirror reflection in it. So, and after that, it was ready to be removed from the jig, which was as simple as just taking my fret saw and sawing it off at the nut location, and sawing it loose at the 23rd fret location, which is the end of the fretboard, which I redefined and moved in almost a 16th of an inch shorter to accommodate this guitar, which someone had moved the neck pickup forward a little bit. And you can see, with that said, in case I forget to show it, you can see it's really beautiful, and it doesn't look squatty or short. I'm talking about the length from the edge of that fret slot to the beginning of the binding, where you're just looking at the wood, and that's really not accurate because it will actually have the fret. It will have the fret in there as well. But you can see it's still really beautiful, and you see plenty of wood there. And what's awesome, I don't think I will forget, but I'm within about a 16th of an inch of the 16th fret location. So I'm really happy with that. That turned out really well. So I was able to split all those differences there, and get a beautiful job. And it's one of those jobs I wouldn't have even, if I hadn't have mentioned any of that, I don't think anybody would have picked up on it. Even Jerome, like when I sent it back to him, he wouldn't have been aware that I call it trickery, that I had done a little bit of trickery there to pull that off. So hit that with the fret saw, and till I started smelling antique pine, and did. And then that was ready to remove, except it was still dot glued in the middle. So I took a very, very sharp putty knife, and at that location that I had identified, just kind of went under it, because it's still rectangular, but went under it right there, and it cracked loose. Flipped it over, hit that side, and then it completely came loose. Excuse me. Cleaned anything up that I needed to clean up, and don't sand on your wood. And certainly if you are doing what I usually do, I take a very aggressive rasp, and because some of the pine always breaks loose and leaves a little bit of a tear out. You want the pine to tear out and be stuck to the back of the rosewood, and then get that cleaned off. But don't ever sand across on an angle, because if you introduce any scarring or really nasty scratches there, especially on a fretboard that does not have a binding, whatever I just don't really have anything to show it, but if you had scratched up the bottom edge there, once it gets glued down to your finished guitar, man, there's a fly in here. You'll see you'll see that scar, and it's really almost impossible to get rid of that. Okay, so just be thinking about what you don't realize is actually the finished guitar, even though you haven't tapered it yet. Because if you introduce that, even if you introduced a slipped chisel, see, that's typically what would happen. Someone would try to grab a chisel and start cutting that stuff off. But then if you go into it like I just did right there and just scratch it really bad, might show up. Okay, so pulled it out of that. It's rectangular. It's ready to set this to the side, but don't remove these yet. And now it's ready to. I've got a special jig that I use for this that has toggle clamps on it, and I just put it where I want and I just toggle clamp it down. But it's universal for other stuff as well. But it is as simple as, if you have a rectangular board that you want to introduce this trapezoidal path to, then you're just working from dimensions, and typically 2 1/4 max finished at this location right here. I call it the 23rd fret location, because if the scale were to continue, that basically binding would be glued up against where you dropped it at the 23rd fret location, and which I did, my 23rd fret location. Or if you were building a 24th fret guitar, then you would be cutting that off at the 25th fret location. Okay, that'll make perfect sense, because you're just relying on a very gradual deduct in the width between each fret location. But up here, we'll talk about pearl, and if the pearl gets, if you put pearl in, now I won't talk about that because I don't have time to talk about it. I may, but the short is you're just getting ready to taper the thing. And how do you do that? Well, if you're 2 1/4 inch wide here, and your target is 1 3/4 inch wide here, which is what Jerome wants, which is that's a very wide nut location. But since he's a big guy, that's perfect for him. And so then you just start deducting whatever it is you're working with. If you're working with 60 thousandths binding on either side, which is absolutely my favorite. It's really beautiful. It's not too wide, but it's close enough to historically accurate to look kind of sweet and narrow, but it's also wide enough that it gives you plenty of material to shape and blend into the lower, and build a beautiful looking guitar, as well as a really nice feeling guitar. And you don't run the risk of getting too thin as you're trying to round into that lower. So with that said, 1/16 of an inch on either side. Well, then if we're 1 3/4, initially we've got to drop that down to 1 5/8 inch. I'm talking about the rosewood. And then we're always working from the center line, so then we've got to take 1 5/8 of an inch target for our rosewood, split that in half, that becomes 13/16. So what you see there is from that center line mark over to the very beginning of the end of the rosewood. Well, that's 13/16, as it is on the other side. Now, if I want to come up here when I'm doing my installation and offset, and I'm exaggerating, but if I want to offset by just once, either the left side of the mark or the right side of the mark, if that makes sense, that's what I'm talking about. Then I can make that judgment call later on. But I always want to do my build work towards true center line. or from the true center line, because I'll do my cowboy stuff later on. But right now, I want this to be precision accurate so that anything I'm doing later is just that. It's just done later. And we'll get to that in a minute. So with that said, all I do is find that 13/16 point, come over here, right where the binding is, and I make that, 13/16 mark right there. I come up here, and off of this sunshine line that was on the back, if I were 2 1/4, subtract off 1/8 of an inch for the binding on either side, that puts me at 2 1/8. 1/2 of 2 1/8 is 1 1/16. Is that right? 2 1/8. Yeah, 1 1/16. So off the center, I came over and made a mark at 1 1/16 on both sides. And then once I had those 4 marks on the back side of the rosewood, all I had to do then was just position them. That's on my mouth. I positioned that path along the very edge of a beautiful straight board that I trust on my table saw, and then I just make one single pass along my table saw, and I cut off more material up here at the narrow location, and then I taper off, and there's virtually none that comes. It typically goes ahead and comes through that location right there, because I don't need this to be 2 1/2 inches wide when I first start building it. I typically start out right at 2 1/4, and then all I'm taking off is, like I just said, roughly a 1/16 of an inch. And by the time the saw blade goes through that, the drop up here is only about 8 inches long. And it's probably going to be about 1/4 of an inch wide or something like that up here. And then you remove that. Okay, so you remove that, and then you're going to turn it this direction. And obviously, once you make the cut, obviously I know you're reading between the lines. It does not have the binding on it yet, but then it'll flip, and then you'll have the mass of, well, it actually is. I'm not going to move it, but the mass will be back here now, and it will be the saw blade will come in, and it really won't start introducing any drop until about right here because of the width of the saw blade. Now, the most important part before you do trust this jig to align these cut marks on is you've got to find whatever, and I always have like a piece of poplar that I trust, and I'm always working with it, monitoring it, making certain that it's staying true, and poplar is incredible. I don't even have to seal it. But if this was 4 1/4 inches wide, then I just take it over to my table saw, and I just push the fence over. If that's the blade right there, I just push the fence over until I feel it drag just a little bit. Then I lock the fence, and then I just make one clean pass, PASS. And what that does, I know that this was the base side. This was riding up against my fence, and I could recall that by that arrow that I drew right there. Well, I now just took my piece of $3 poplar or $10 poplar, whatever it's worth, and turned it into a precision jig that I can trust to do, master level tapering work. Okay. And I did just that by pushing it over there, running it through once, making that real clean pass. Then I knew if I glue, wherever I either toggle clamp this down or temporarily glue it down with masking tape and CA glue, which is what I typically would recommend. It's real fast and easy. And because if you get it wrong, you can tear it. You can tear it loose and start over. But then I just ran it down the table saw and cut off that amount right there, as I just said. Flipped it over and then cut it off in that location right there. Right behind the binding. Okay, very simple. That's about as simple as it gets as far as the operation goes, and that's what's so funny. Even though it's an incredibly simple operation, it creates one of the most complex and safely initiated cuts on the whole build. And because after you've spent all of this time on here, uh, you got one shot at this. Either you do it right and you know for a fact that you're going to do it right and not make any mistakes, or you flip the lights off and you leave the shop and don't come back until you have watched a video like this, or either you know for certain that, yeah, I'm completely okay with temporarily attaching this atop this jig here, some sort of jig, and routing it off. But I don't trust router bits when it comes to cutting stuff like this that is goes from super strong to all of a sudden non-existent to super strong, non-existent, etc., etc. I just fear tear out. I have routed fretboards before, but I was always so nervous and so wound up that I couldn't relax because I've done them this way for so long. I could do it blindfolded. And I really mean that. I really could. I wouldn't, of course, but it would work if you had the jig. But see, the thing is, even this jig would not work unless you weren't putting binding on it. And we're not going to be building a 59 replica without binding. So you see my point? You're going to have to rely on just working off a center line or either making your own jig. And I do. I've got one over there where I used to build the Flying V replicas. It's more narrow. Well, actually, no, it's not, because see, the Flying V does not get the binding. So I take that back. I don't have a jig to do route work for this guitar right here or that guitar, only because of the binding. Because if you were building a jazz guitar that might be, ebony in the middle, and then all of a sudden it goes white, black, or maybe it goes white, black, 20 thousandths each, and then 60 thousandths of white on the outside, well, then you've got to engineer all of that taper down and then accommodate for swelling of binding, stuff like that. Again, I've been working on this since Saturday, part of Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So for 4 days, it took me 4 days to get to the point where I could just do a video and just talk about it. And that's what a lot of you guys don't understand when you make the statement that, well, why don't you ever do any work on camera? And it's just because it would take an hour to set up, and if I'm even in a good mood to do a video, and it would take an hour to set up just to do that taper work right there when I need to do the job and stay focused and not miss anything is what I'm saying. So there's part of me that's saying I'm not good enough to to actually show it on camera, because odds are it probably would f something up, and then if I did that, I'd never do another video. I'd be so furious at myself for attempting to be, everything to everybody. But this one, I'm extremely happy with it. It's just so beautiful, and I'm not surprised or anything, but I'll probably can just look down a little bit. But it takes a long time to get to this point. But once you do get to this point, you can almost breathe a sigh of relief because you're getting really close to being able to finish the job without making any major mistakes, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so it took a long time to get here, but let's move forward. So now that we've got it tapered and we've made that last cut, and now we can take it loose from my jig and get this off the table. Now we're ready to, well, actually, no, I need to leave that on the table because I'll show you how I use that I now use that as my base by which I do my binding with my $35 Ken Bindall cement. I've tried this stuff before, just doesn't work. So if you're tempted by that, it doesn't work. But I do keep it. But this is about $35 from Stuart McDonald. By the time it is shipped to you, I think it's $29 from them. But make certain that you keep the air out of it, and always keep it standing up in some sort of container like this. And in the bottom of this glass container, there's probably going to be a bunch of toothpicks in there, because I'll use those toothpicks just to verify that the tip is clean. So let me back up. I'm getting too rudimentary there, because if you're of this level type craftsman, you know that type stuff. But I just want to show you that product. Stuart McDonald Bindall Cement Guitar Binding Glue. And you can also use it to glue the perloid in, as I think I covered that in the beginning of this video. This is the second or third time I've done this video. In case I didn't, you can also use that to glue the perloid in, and it works really well. So I think I did because I was talking about doing router work, and you can route the pearl, and you can also route the perloid radius is what I'm talking about. Okay, so you're sitting here with a blank of wood that's really beautiful, it's radius, and you got to get this binding on. If you trust yourself, there's two approaches you could take, and I almost did this. I started to just go ahead and glue the fretboard down, and then just glue the binding to the guitar. But I didn't trust myself to come in here and get close any of this Goldtop. You know, I did. I mean, I could put the blue tape up there, and it would have been fine. But because because this guitar was not factory stock 100% original, I wasn't completely certain that I was going to be able to just glue this fretboard down truly by the center line. So I wanted to get that binding on there in case I had to do a little bit of that trickery that I was talking about, where if I wanted to shift a 64th of an inch on either side, then I wanted to make certain that the binding was already there and defining the true fretboard. So it would force me to make certain that I didn't think, it's okay. I'll probably be able to make up with the binding once it swells, and then maybe I tape it too tight and it doesn't swell at all. And then I regretted not being able to move that fretboard just a micro thousandths of a push to, get the job right. Okay, so splitting hairs here, but that's really kind of what it boils down to when you're building a guitar. You're kind of working off of that center line, but then you're also, I call it, making some cowboy moves, but reading between the lines. I'm not talking about shifting anything visible. Okay. So when you're getting ready to put the binding, when you're getting ready to glue the binding on here, you want to make certain that you tape some construction paper on the back, because you want to lift that wood up so that when you're actually installing that binding, just in the weird event you had a see, this binding is not real precision square on the edge. You want to always be cutting it off. So I want the binding to overhang on the back a little bit, and for certain it's going to overhang. Oh, keep dropping everything. It's certainly going to overhang quite a bit on the front, once it goes in on the front. So don't try to cut this down to the finished, or don't even try to cut it down very close to your finished target. It's just, you can do it on your router table, and I've done it successfully quite a bit, but I prefer to just put it in large and then just make one clean pass, working it down later on using the jig that we have over here. So, you got the construction paper on the back. You've glued this in. And just go to Stuart McDonald and watch videos on how to do binding, because it would take me an hour just to talk about how to do binding, especially for those of you guys who have never done it before. And I don't have time to talk about that in this video, but there are numerous videos out there about how to do one piece of binding, or how to do like 9 pieces of binding all at once, which when I'm building like a jazz guitar with all the beautiful black, white, black, white, black, it's called multiply binding. When I'm doing that, I'm doing every bit of it at once. And it's really difficult to figure out how to do it, but then once you see it done, you realize, well, gosh, I can do that. That's not that bad, as long as you follow those operations. And again, I just don't have time to talk too much about it, because it would boil down to like Eric's SG, the custom headstock just took, I don't even remember, I think it was like a week and a half that I worked on that headstock overlay, doing all that multiply binding. But it's beautiful. Okay. So there you have it. It's all glued in, and it takes about 30-45 minutes to do the binding job. A little bit of tape here, a little bit of tape there. But the way I do it, after it's all said and done, that construction paper guaranteed that the fretboard stayed raised up a little bit. And then what I'm ready to do now is take some real long straight edges that are of poplar and put them on either side, and then take my quick grip clamps, or you could use any sort of cabinet or C clamp, and I'm going to clamp that binding perfectly true and straight. Now keep in mind this is like 30 to 40 minutes after it's been glued, and I know that it's not going to slip or anything, because even if it's swelled a little bit, you've got about 15 to 30 minutes to get it in the clamp so you can get it back under control and it doesn't distort. In other words, it will distort on you if you don't do that. Okay, so you have that clamped in. You come back the next morning, pull it out, pull all the tape off, pull all the construction paper off. Now you're ready to before you go to this jig, you're now ready to flip it over face down. Keep in mind the binding is still square, so it's going to act like a little box. It's just going to rest perfectly on the other side of the binding, sitting down. But what you're about to do, you're going to have to block it on both sides so that this fretboard doesn't move. But at this point, this is where you're going to come in with your Sheffield made in England scrapers, which I love these things. And the binding will be sticking up about a millimeter, maybe a 32nd of an inch or something like that. Might be sticking up a 16th of an inch, but you're going to want to make full scale pencil marks from the inside of each piece of binding to make certain that once you do truly get down to the bottom, because you're going to be scraping that binding off flush with the rosewood back, you want to make certain that you never see the pencil completely disappear. I don't have a problem seeing the pencil fade a little bit on the sides. That's awesome, because what does that tell me? I can't catch a fingernail. I can't even feel it. I can't close my eyes and tell you. Yeah, I can kind of feel the difference between wood and ABS, but otherwise I don't feel any surface changes. Okay. And when I'm at that point, well, I'm finished. Now keep in mind, it's still sticking up high on this side and it's really ugly, and there's runaway glue in here, especially up here where each fret slot got fairly close. I'm pretty good when I do the glue work down here where it's fairly clean, but it's better to have a little bit, just a little bit, read between the lines, just a little bit too much glue, and let it squeeze out, because it will very easily clean off of your wood. You're going to be doing a lot more sanding and whatnot than to try to do a real clean job but not have enough, because you do need a substantial amount of glue in there to bond both surfaces. But you'll know if it's actually bound really well or if it's not. And the thing I love about the bindall, if you see this right here, you can't even see the join. You might be able to see it, but if you can see it, it's only because I haven't shaped it yet. But to tell you how good the bindall cement is, when I do a Les Paul replica, I'll just run my 5/16 inch binding in here on the bottom, and then I will come in on the top with another piece of 5/16 inch, and I will Stuart McDonald bindall cement glue that extremely wet, a lot of glue, because I want it to melt those two together. I want it to weld those two together, but it's so good that even when I do that and it comes off of this pitch right here till it hits 5/16 of an inch, you can't see the glue line where they went together. And vice versa up here, you can't see any glue lines at all. That's what I should just say. It makes an invisible glue line, okay? And it's good. Now you need to add a little bit of acetone on a brush with that to help kind of make that happen. Again, go watch those videos and you'll see that I almost made a mistake by not telling you about the acetone. So, because the acetone is pretty important in certain locations like that. Okay, so once you got the back nice, beautiful, and flush, now you're ready to go back to this jig right here and get it back in place, because we're about to take our radius sanding block and just sand that excess binding off, radius and flush with the actual fretboard. And um, but how you have to do this, obviously, is that's in its original location. Didn't have to be. I think that's the one. I can't remember. No, that is the one I moved right there because this one was so narrow and so close to the edge. I didn't want to risk breaking this one. So this little drop is in its original location. But in order to get the fretboard with the binding on it back in place, I had to break this one loose and well, completely clean it up, put the fretboard up there perfectly on center line, and then do some additional CA glue on this little thing and glue it back in place on center where it was originally, and it gave me a beautiful blocking support on either end that I didn't have to do any sort of clamping, so that I could now keep in mind it's really ugly, it's really unattractive. All this binding is still sticking up. It's literally sticking up probably over 1/8 of an inch on the front, but I've got to work it down to that point right there where the top of the binding is obviously on the exact same radius as the fretboard is. Okay. And believe it or not, I start out with 120 first. Okay, again, just like I did the back side, I start out with 120 on that sanding block, but I've got this just covered in pencil lines from the inside edge of the binding all the way over to there. I did clean off some of the excess glue on the top, but I didn't worry about any glue that might have been in the fret slot. Glad I thought of that. I did want to get any glue out of the corner so that I had plenty of pencil marking area in there. Now, when I have that pencil mark, then I'm able to take my 120 grit sandpaper, even though this is 220. I had 120 grit, and I did not misspeak. I had 120 grit, then I went to 220, and then I was pretty much finished with it. No, I did take it on up to 400. So 400 aluminum oxide, 220, and then where's my 120? I've been using the same piece of 120 for, gosh, seems like months. So stuff lasts forever. And in other words, it can just be kind of rough because and I'm not about to touch that, I'll screw it up, but you're wanting to cut that off very quickly. But what will happen, see, that'll be floating in the middle. So what's going to happen is you're going to get a false reading. A floating sandpaper will kind of start kissing the pencil marks there in the middle, and it'll spook you into thinking that you're flattening out the radius. You don't want to continue with the 120 because yes, it'll start scratching your pearl. So once you see the middle part of the pencil lead begin to fade a little bit, then let's transfer over to the 220, and let's make certain that then we're getting a little bit more aggressive with our cutting work, because see, all we're doing is just working down the binding. Okay, so now at this point we're getting, and I can't because I've already taken that up to 400, so I'll just put it on this side. So at this point, well, I don't have to put any paper on it. At this point, I'm actually beginning to put some muscle into it and cut it. And don't do any of this stuff here. Make certain that you're actually like truly cutting and focusing on keeping the tool fairly true. And you don't want to be traveling all this crazy work like that. I don't like the idea of trying to just cut one side. Allow both pieces of binding to act as a like a train rail by which you are riding along that train rail, and then that's what the pencil marks were for. Once you finally get to that point where you're beginning to see the pencil marks over here fade, and you can even see it, you can see that it's almost there, then you're beginning to make the determination of, okay, how much more cutting do I want to do? But if you're not pressing hard enough, the floating sandpaper in the middle will scratch up the binding. Whereas if you are truly putting some pressure on it and keeping it true, well, then you're making certain that the sandpaper is following the curvature of your radiusing block, because you might be cutting like a 7.5-inch radius fender or something like that, and you don't want there comes a point where you better have already stopped because you'll start changing the radius if you're not careful. And then right there at the last, I can show this because this is exactly how the operation was. I'm actually making really good contact, just holding it by hand, fairly tight on the edges there, and I feel the tool fall in line with the radius up under the tool. Don't fight that. Just let it follow that. And all we're doing here is focusing on the binding, getting that binding true. You see how important the little jig is because not only is it secure, but it's heavy and it doesn't just slip around on the table too much. It slipped a little bit, but not enough to hurt anything. And then once you get to this point, you're continually, I don't have my little wire brush here. You've got a small wire brush where you're keeping any sort of pearl and or rosewood or ebony off. Just keeping the damn thing clean is what I'm trying to say. Just keep it clean and then work your way to the finish line. Because again, like I said, all we're doing here is just getting the fretboard, the binding to be on the absolute same plane as the fretboard. If it was a flat fretboard, then I would be using this flat side back here, but still going through those operations, where I cut the binding down until I saw the pencil marks, et cetera, et cetera. Then I went to my 220, stayed straight. Then I went to my 400 flat, and then I'm just cutting everything flat. And I'm cutting right up to the point to where by then all of the pencil marks on the pearl are gone, and there might be just some very faint pencil marks over here on the side. You might be tempted to think, okay, then that's awesome. That should be close enough. I would say it's almost close enough, but it's not perfect. So let's just go ahead and take it one or two more passes and make certain that there aren't any pencil marks left. And what will that guarantee? Exactly what I just said. It will guarantee that our binding is beautiful, beautiful, and radiused with the fretboard. And what am I holding in my hands here? This is how I always built my jazz guitars, where now I'm ready to take my frets and actually do a notch on either end. Whatever the length of this fret is. I'm not going to start talking about fretwork at all, other than just to get you to see my reasoning. I'm actually, after I did all that work, then it was time to come in and spend about 30. Where are my tools? Oh, and not this one. I need my other X-Acto knife. Let me pause briefly. Okay, so at that point, what you're doing, you're getting ready to just verify that all the glue is cleaned out. And typically, you're going to have more runaway glue up here than you are down here, as I've already mentioned. But you do want to verify that your binding, you can pull on it and it won't break loose. If it will break loose right now, then what I would recommend is use the thin CA glue, and actually wherever it's breaking loose, stick a pin through it or an X-Acto knife blade and actually encourage it to open up a little bit, and then drop your CA glue in there, but only on a fretboard that you're able to control. In other words, like I wouldn't do that type stuff on Chip's fretboard that is vintage correct, that I don't want it to look any different than it looked when I opened up the case, and that was like 55 to 60 years old. So be very careful with that runaway CA glue, because it'll make a mess. Okay, and then repair whatever was damaged, but there was whatever broke loose. But with this one, there was no break, nothing broke loose or anything. So I got all that cleaned out, and that's where I came in with my depth gauge. And when I was triple checking that I truly had enough slot in there for absolutely every fret location. Be funny if I found one that wasn't deep enough. I'm bumping into something right there. So let's verify that, make certain there's not anything. And before you do your frets, you want to double check this again, make certain there's not a little cricket in there. And I use the back side of the X-Acto blade. and just kind of clean it out a little bit. Blow it out. And how did I determine this depth right here? One way to go about it is just take your Stuart McDonald fretboard, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, but you could do this, and then just make a pencil mark, and that would define what Stuart McDonald recognizes as an acceptable depth for their fretboard fret slots. Now I'm being a smartass. That's ridiculous. Why would you cut out double, over double what you need to receive a traditional fret? So what I did was I took what I just showed you and I made a pencil mark. I don't think this is showing up very well on the camera because I did this in another video that I erased. But I just made a pencil mark below the tang, and then I just made certain that as I was doing all of my initial fret slotting by hand, that when I dropped this card down in there, that the pencil disappeared, or at least got really close to it as I was working that direction, because I always know I'm always going to be coming back and double checking that. And if there's one that's got a little bit of runaway glue in there, then I can take my X-Acto knife blade down on a real nice flat surface and kind of clean it out and even score it enough to make certain that I've got a good depth there. Now, read between the lines. I'm not talking about cutting it so close that the bottom edge of your fret tang is resting atop the bottom of the. No, don't ever do that, because there's a risk of something breaking off and getting down in there, like when you're putting the fret in, or either you're gluing them in, and the glue is what do they call it, a vapor, like it's a, I don't think it's called vapor lock. It may be vapor locking, where there's compression in there and the glue has nowhere to go, so it will bed, but then all of a sudden it will be like a the pressure will just start slowly pushing the fret back out, and you won't know it. You will have thought that it bedded well, but it didn't. It did, but then all of a sudden the pressure that it was under, like a basketball, if you started pressing on a basketball that had a little hole in it, well, then it's going to take the path of least resistance, as you know, and it's going to push that fret back out. Okay, so don't go too shallow, but you don't have to go double, because the further you go, well, you lose a lot of tone and you lose strength there as well. Okay. All right, what do we got? 52 minutes, or is that an hour and 45 minutes? I think it's 42 minutes. I've still got a crack across my phone screen. I can't see it to tell, but I know it's over 25 minutes. Let me look at what I want to talk. Let me pause, get the table under control, and then I'll figure out how to get out of this video, as I say. Okay, I'll just keep the video kind of light from here on out, and let's just do a little bit of a visual. And you don't want to do too much wiping, but I do want to just kind of see my progress. Again, this fretboard is going to be about probably 7 to 10 times darker than this, but this will give you an idea of how beautiful and true everything is, and also how beautiful the cream is, the all parts cream binding. I also use a binding called parchment, and parchment is really beautiful. It's more of like a milk white color. It's really beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But I like the cream because it gets me closer to the vintage correct. Oh, I'm glad I thought about that, because I'll talk about some stain work that I did atop the guitar when I was curious to see what would happen if I just took the trans tint straight out of the bottle. Because I did this on, I think it was Rick's. Yeah, it was Rick's 1980 Gibson Les Paul Custom, where we had the original binding on like 60% of the body, but I feathered in and scarf joined all the multiply binding, and then I came in with a nitrocellulose mix, lacquer mix with trans tint amber. I think it might be vintage amber, and then I brushed in like 40 years of cigarette smoke and sweat and all that crap. And I did the same thing here. I took that stuff straight out of the bottle and I just stained the devil out of that to see what would happen where I had sanded in some of this binding in the event. Well, it wasn't going to happen. I don't know why I brought that up. I was about to say in the event I had to do some shaping or sanding, which obviously I would not do. But what I really meant was in the event if I wanted to uh, offer to Jerome, hey, if you want me to do like I call it the bar fly. It's like the bar fly tent where it's just lived its whole life in the bar and it's all smoked out. I could come in and use that mix that I just told you about that I used on Rick's guitar, and we could do that. But there's a part of me, I don't know. I don't really know if it's necessary, but we'll get there later on. So, and I don't know why I brought that up, especially with this video about the end. Uh, and you can kind of see what the natural cream looks like against the real hard amber. Again, it's your call. We'll do whatever you want to do out there, Jerome. So let me know. And again, there's a part of me, and I do these videos, and I know a lot of you guys, you keep making statements about why don't you ever do any work? Why don't you don't do any work? I don't mind you talking, but don't do some work. And it's like, well, I just spent 50 some odd minutes talking about work that took me about 4 days to do. And in other words, it would take 45 minutes just to do one video showing you how to set up and do one piece of binding. And to me, that I covered more ground from a theoretical standpoint in 45 minutes. For those who are truly qualified to do this work, can read between the lines and actually pull it off, rather than me just show you how to use an X-Acto knife. That's silly. So I know a lot of you guys are here for just entertainment, and that's fine. You're welcome to stick around, but I can't clarify in each of my videos that these are strictly for vocational purposes and from a theoretical standpoint, and they're primarily for the clients to see the progress of the job, and on and on and on. I don't want to go there in every video. So anyway, so very happy with it. It's really beautiful, turning out well. Again, I wish there was someone that offered these for sale that was of a quality that you could trust, but I know the stuff that is available. And what I was talking about, the Asian stuff, you can buy these for like $59. There's no way I'm going to pay $59 for this much for 4, 5, 7 days worth of work. I don't trust that at all because I have bought those products before, not fretboards, but I have bought their necks before, and they literally were shipped to me with imperfections. They were horrifically wavy, or they had mislocations on the fret locations. And again, if you have the capability of cutting 3 of these slots, then you have the ability to cut all 22 correctly. And that's what I meant by it seems like that crap is just engineered in just to piss everybody off. And, or at least me, they know that it gets under my skin. So when you're getting ready to glue it down, now all you got to do is use your the 16th inch drill bits that you cut, and then drive those in, after you've got your glue on there. I'll talk about this briefly. I've already covered in past videos, but once you get ready to glue it down, you're going to put just enough epoxy on both sides, or just enough tight bond on both sides that it's wet. And then and even epoxy or tight bond, you can work the excess glue out, but then before you're ready to clamp it down with your actual clamping station, I should have already talked about this. Your special little jig that you designed to clamp it down with. See, it started out on, I think, like 6 degrees, but it ended up being about 4-degree cut. See, that's kind of like a artificial radius, but primarily just to make certain that I give a real equal support to the fretboard once it's glued down. And wherever those pin locations are, they will stick through. And this is so important. You'll take your 90-watt soldering gun about 2 hours later and heat that up after the glue or epoxy is set, heat that up, and then you'll want to go ahead and remove those, because within 2 to 4 hours, your epoxy or your I wouldn't remove those before 4 hours with epoxy or before an hour and a half with tight bond. That's very conservative. But if you leave these in, especially with epoxy, you'll have to remove these with a 90-watt soldering gun, where you're heating that up and very gently turning, because you're having to melt the epoxy that you did not. In other words, you epoxied it in. Read between the lines. Don't. In other words, just don't do that. All right, let me check the time. Are we over an hour already? All right. Long enough video. I'll end it there. Appreciate you guys dropping in. And I have no idea what's next related to this guitar, but it won't be very long because they're all coming together all at once, which is a really good feeling. And I'm actually already started the fret work on one of the guitars, and soon to start the other one. So in other words, I'm at a point to where I'm about to do frets on all three guitars. Okay, thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next video.